Alright friends, so let's get hands on and begin configuring port security. So as you may notice, we have a super simple topology, and as we progress we might increase the complexity just a touch, but for now let's keep things as basic as possible and just dig in. So clearly here we can see we have a singular switch and we have VPC2 on the left and VPC3 on the right. This one here, VPC2, connects to interface 111 and VPC3 connects to interface 112. So what we want to do is we want to effectively configure some basic settings on our switch. We'll give an IP address to this particular device as well as this particular device. Let's maybe perhaps create a VLAN on the actual switch itself as well as an interface VLAN so that this particular switch can be placed in that VLAN and ping the switch for connectivity. And the same thing will be true here. And then we'll go about manipulating the configurations on these interfaces to effectively, well, secure access on them, okay? Hopefully that makes sense. So with that said, let's go and just do it then. So first things first, let's go into the switch itself. Okay, configure terminal. Let's give this a name of just switch 1. Now the first thing we will do here is let's create a little VLAN. So we'll say VLAN number 5 and just give it a name of 5. If we exit back out and let's go into interface 111. And what I will do is I'll make it a layer 2 interface, so I'll say no routing as well as no shutdown. Similar thing over on interface 112, we'll say no routing, make it layer 2, no shutdown to bring it up and exit back out. So with that now done, what I will do is I'll place both interfaces into VLAN number 1, okay, or VLAN number 1, VLAN number 5 should I say. So I'll say VLAN access 5 and do the same for interface 112 just as so. Perfect, so what I will now do is create my virtual interface. I'll say interface VLAN 5. I'll say IP address 192.168.5.1/24 and I'll just say no shut. Okie dokie, so let's go on to VPC2 over here. And what I will do is I'll say IP 192.168.5.2 this can be and make it a /24. And let's do the similar thing over on VPC3. 192.168.5.3/24. Okay, so as we should be able to see here, if I try to ping 192.168.5.1 on the actual switch itself, VPC3 can actually make that connection. Let me just pull this over a shade, as we can see right there. And if I go into VPC2 and try to do the same type of thing, just ping 192.168.5.1. And as we can see, that also has connectivity. So really, what have we done here? Quite simply, we have some configurations on this particular switch. And we have attached 2 devices to that switch via the switch's interfaces. Now, right now, this interface here is granting access to whoever is on the end of it. And in a similar sense, this particular switch is granting access to itself via this particular interface to anyone who happens to be connected. So let's try to be a little bit more discerning and not just allow for anyone to connect in, okay? So let's go into the switch itself again. And what we're going to do is type some particular commands to lock down that access. Now what I want to do is just to highlight something to you first, okay? So let's go into interface 111. Now the commands we're going to be using are going to be based on this one right here, port access, okay? So if I just, in fact, let me just pull this over a little shade and use my context sensitive help. Here are the options that we have. Now the one that I want to go into first is this one right here, port security, okay? So if I look at the options I have right here, what I can effectively do is I can specify how many MAC addresses am I going to allow on this particular port, and we can do this via the client limits. So if we know we have one end device and that should only ever be the one device connected, perhaps it makes sense therefore to configure the client limit on this particular interface to be 1. Now in a similar sense, we also have options to disable port security on a particular port if it happens to be configured. If it does not, we can therefore enable it. Now this one right here, we'll talk about this very, very shortly. We're going to leave this for a little moment. And this one right here, sticky learn, effectively, this is going to allow us to, well, automatically or dynamically learn a MAC address that happens to come in, and we're going to save it as essentially an authorized MAC address. So what does that actually mean in real terms? Well, as opposed to going on to this particular device here, finding out the MAC address, and then manually typing that MAC address as an allowed MAC on this interface, what we can essentially do here is we can say, hey, I want to say, for example, limit the amount of MAC addresses to only be 1, but as opposed to actually typing it in to the device itself right here, what I want to do is just to learn the first MAC address that comes in, and we'll use that one right there. So essentially, we can just say, hey, what is your MAC address? Learn it. And then whatever comes back, just say that is only one that is allowed on this interface. So what that means is that once that MAC address is configured to be the one associated with this particular port, let's say we had some type of rogue attacker, and what they did was they disconnected the computer here, and instead they tried to get access to the network by plugging their device directly into this interface. Well, because this particular device is going to have a different MAC address than what this one was, and the device here is expecting the MAC address that is configured here, because we actually have a mismatch, this particular attacker is not going to be granted access. So let's actually see how this works in reality then. So on the interface, we say port access, port security, and then I'll say sticky learn. And at this point here, what I want to do is I just want to enable that particular feature, okay? So if I hit enter, essentially it's going to associate the MAC address on VPC2 to this particular interface. Now if we go to VPC2 right here, and I just do show IP, we're actually going to see the IP address we did configure, but more crucially, we have that burnt in MAC address right here, okay? See the one that ends in 02? And if I go into interface 112, let's do the same type of thing. I will say port access, port security, sticky learn, and I will enable it. Now here's the thing, as it stands right now, if I try to do the command show port access, port security, and I look at the interface information, let's just say interface all, and we'll look at the client status, we can see here port security is not configured. We still have to do a few things. So if I do a show run right here, here's the configurations for both of these devices. Now I'm going to have to also enable port security on the interface itself, interface 111. We will say port access, port security, and we can see we can just enable this. And again, do the same thing over on interface number 2. Let's just enable this. Now watch this again, this is something you have to be careful about. Oh, and I'm forgetting one last command, let's say client status. Again, we can see here that the port security is not enabled. Now this might not be quite so obvious to you, because it looks like if we look at the actual output here, we can indeed see here that we are attempting to enable port security, and we're trying to enable sticky learning, but this is the thing. When we're doing this, we also have to specify that we want to enable port security globally. Now this doesn't mean that we are going to effectively enable it on all of our interfaces, but we have to enable the feature globally, and then we can, from that point on, choose to enable or disable them on particular interfaces. So let's just go and do that then, okay? So the command I will do here is from global configuration context. I'll say port security, or not port access, port security, and we can see here if I just choose to enable that. So let's go and check the output again, okay? Now this still might be a little bit surprising to you, okay? We'll say show port access, port security. We'll go into the interface. We'll say all interfaces, and we'll look at the client status. Now if we check this out, we can still see that there are no port security clients found. Now in my case here, this really is a function of, well, the emulated environment. These two PCs are really, really quiet. In a real live production network, you're going to see a lot more traffic coming from these particular devices, you know, generating their own traffic, responding to requests, that type of thing. But as it stands right now, these actual devices have been sitting long enough that essentially they have aged out of the MAC address table on this particular device. So effectively, since we have configured these interfaces to actually be sticky and learning these particular MAC addresses, no information has actually came in to learn. And we can actually verify this if we go to our little device. And if I say show MAC address table, we can actually see here no MAC entries are found. So let's go and try and change that then. So if I go on here and I try to ping 192.168.5.1, now we're getting a response back. And again on VPC3, if I arrow up, do the same type of thing. Now we're getting a response back again. That should actually generate information in the MAC address table, as we see right here. And we can actually see here, we do have port access security configured. So once again, if I arrow up and try this particular command, now we can actually see some information. We can see here that on port 111, we have a sticky dynamic learning of a MAC address. And this is the MAC address we've associated with this particular port. We can see here it ends in 02. The rest of this MAC address, because it's just a virtual PC, is the exact same down the bottom here. See this too? So 02 is connected to port 111. Let's just check this. VPC2, we can see it is 02, and VPC3, if we do the show IP, indeed we can see here this is the one that ends in 03, connected to interface 112. So now we have done the most basic configurations of our port security. Let's now expand our knowledge by introducing some additional concepts.